So hi everyone, welcome to another daily objective. So today we have with us Harry Binswanger. So thank you so much, Harry. We're so honored to have you in the show. So Harry is a philosopher, a member of the board of ARI. He is the author of the book, How We Know Epistemology on an Objectivist Foundation. And also he is running the Harry Binswanger letter, which is a membership only website. So you subscribe and you become part of an objectivist community where Harry is having a show, but also we discuss, there's a forum. So I encourage people to check it out, hbletter.com. So the reason we have Harry with us...
That's not quite right, Nikos. hbletter.com. You don't want
two L's. Yes,
yeah.
hbletter.com.
Yeah.
We can put the link in YouTube. So Raz, if you could do that. So we have Harry with us today to discuss a bit more the recent smears that we've seen to Ayn Rand. So a couple of weeks ago, we saw one of the main intellectuals, let's say, of Keynesianism and of the liberal New York Times type of side of the intellectual side in the United States, write an article saying that Ayn Rand is to blame for tens of thousands of COVID deaths. And last week, we saw BBC, which is the most prominent media outlet in the UK, BBC4 having an artistic quote, or maybe not quote, creation, where it supposed a dramatized dialogue between some people in the life of Ayn Rand. And as we said in the Monday episode, this was full of lies, full of distortions. So Harry, I want your comments on two things. The first one is, we see these attacks being very high profile, so they come from very high places. And also, the other characteristic is they're very lazy and very bad. So very cheap in a way. So you can find mistakes there that you could expect that the author could do some Googling and figure it out. So should we be flattered that we see the New York Times and BBC dealing with Rand? And why don't they invest a bit more time, so at least to make the attacks a bit more credible?
You know, we at ARI got the New York Times to change that headline in the online version and to publish an objection to it by Ankar Gate, our resident philosopher at the Institute. So we had some success there. I don't know if we would have any success with the BBC because this is not presented as a factual report, but as a drama. I listened to about 20, 25 minutes of it and found it too silly to go further. To answer your question directly, what does it mean that they're running these? Well, that they're scared. I think that the presence of Ayn Rand is growing, particularly in the UK. And the success of the London meetup is an example of that. Although you draw from all over the world, don't you? Yeah. But in a post I sent out today, I recounted my experiences in England in the 80s, which is astonishing. No one had heard the name Ayn Rand or Atlas Shrugged or the Fountainhead. I would spend a lot of time in Cambridge, and I went to Heffer's bookstore, which is the kind of unofficial, maybe official college bookstore in Cambridge for the whole university. And I went down and asked the staff, do you have anything by Ayn Rand? Who? Ayn Rand, you know, Atlas Shrugged, blank look. The Fountainhead, blank look. You know, the movie with Gary Cooper from the late 40s of The Fountainhead, where it's an architect? No. So they took me to the catalog and looked up Ayn Rand, and there was one secondary book attacking her from an English professor. And that was, you know, so, well, we can order this for you, and no thanks. And that's not just there. I went to Blackwell's in London, Oxford. And I would ask around, and people generally had not heard of her at bookstores. So all that has changed, and now we have the BBC trying to smear Ayn Rand and objectivism and egoism generally. So I think that's a step in the right direction. You wanted me to say something about the particular.
Yeah, so the question is, look, if you're going to attack someone, at least do a good job. Because the BBC one, it had so big mistakes, such as, for example, Ayn Rand was against the state. So actually, you have to make an effort to make such a huge mistake. So that's why I'm not sure if it's how good news it is. So it looks like the idea is, oh, there's this figure that we need to deal with. But also, yeah, whatever. She's probably one of these libertarians or these conservatives, who knows?
Well, I mean, I've been observing the movement since 1962. Maybe it'd be relevant to recount what happened after I read Atlas Shrugged. I thought, because it's the same thing here, I thought, God, this seems completely right and like the answer to everything, but there must be some hidden flaw. Maybe there's some hidden flaw in there, or else everybody would already be objectivist. It was published 5 years before I read it. So I'm going to ask around. Before I sign up for this philosophy, I'm going to ask around, what's wrong with it? And what I found was that everybody I talked to sounded like a character out of Atlas Shrugged, a villain. Well, things aren't black and white. You can't be theoretical like that. You can't go to extremes. She's in favor of selfishness. That's horrible. You know, there's just no content to it. Now, it's not a scientific survey, but I decided that not only did they not see something she missed, but she saw everything she said, everything they were going to say, and had already answered it in advance in the book. So that's when I took Galt's oath a year later and became an official objectivist, although I really was already. So it's been that way all along. I think there was one article that I've read out of maybe 500 that did represent the philosophy correctly and tried to not even so much argue against it as I remember, but to say it overlooks certain things. It needs qualification. But I knew in the drama, I knew all these people except Nora. I knew Ayn Rand very well. I knew Frank O'Connor pretty well. I knew Eloise moderately well. She was there when I visited Ayn Rand. I went on the train ride that Ayn Rand took to her last talk at New Orleans. And Eloise was on the train, and Frank had died by then, unfortunately. And so, you know, I know these people, and what I heard doesn't even capture how they talked.
So to give some context to people who might not have listened to it. So what happens to this theatrical play is that it's Frank O'Connor, Ayn Rand's husband, Eloise, who is the person who is helping in the house, and Nora, the sister. And it's this amalgam of different quotes. It's imaginary interviews. But the thing is, it's imaginary interviews, not based on some real stuff.
No.
It's the imagination of imaginary interviews. And interestingly, that's probably what passes for art today, which is there is no plot. There's not even a historical, let's say, there's not even a timeline. So you have the imaginary interviews, then you have someone in real life telling things about Ayn Rand. So let's get to the core of it. So part of the premise of this theatrical play is that see what happens when the ideas of Ayn Rand are taken seriously. And the premise is that people around her were not happy. Frank, her sister. So for people who don't know, her sister visited from the United States. There was a bit of disappointment because Rand expected that her sister would appreciate the freedom in the West. Anyway, it didn't work that well. So supposedly everyone is unhappy, including Ayn Rand herself. So Harry, you have spent more than a decade, if I'm not wrong, with Ayn Rand in the circle, let's say. So is your idea that first, she did practice her philosophy in her personal life, and B, was the result general misery, or was the result love and happiness?
So the question is, did she practice her philosophy, and what happens, you know, in her life and so forth, in terms of did it work and so forth? Yeah, she absolutely practiced her philosophy every second. I was with her in her final years. I knew her since 1963, or I was formally introduced in 1964. And by 1966, I was present in her apartment to read a typescript manuscript version of the first 2 chapters of her work on epistemology. I was there kind of as a hanger-on of Alan Gotthelf, who was an older philosophy student that I roomed with, but she wouldn't have let me in if I'd been a random person. Anyway, so I knew her from then, and by the end of her life, I was talking to her on the phone every day, and visiting her at least once a week. Usually we played Scrabble and then talked philosophy. So, I mean, I'm not the slightest doubt that she practiced her philosophy. She had no interest in doing anything else. I mean, it's like saying, well, here's this great crusader against narcotic drugs. Did he actually not take heroin all the time, or did he occasionally sneak out and take heroin? No, of course, you know, somebody who understands and has never been addicted and has no urge, why on earth would they ever take heroin? Or here's a person who's an advocate of modern civilization. Did they ever take off their clothes and put a bone in their nose and run screaming through the street like a savage? No, as a matter of fact, they didn't do that. So, I mean, her philosophy was not some external thing the way it was for us. It was the conclusions she had reached over a lifetime about how the world works and what you need to do to get what you want and what's worth having. So, of course, she lived by it. And there was no question of her deviating from it. It just didn't, you know, it wouldn't come up. Now, the other question was,
what was the effect?
Yeah, the effects were, yeah, she was very happy. She was very unhappy when her husband died, because he was the love of her life. And I'll give you an example. Shortly, I had a magazine called the Objectivist Forum, which I launched after her publication stopped to try and fill a gap in a small way in an Objectivist monthly. She said, we were talking about Frank O'Connor, her husband. She said, you know, someday I'm gonna write for you an article, My Debt to Frank O'Connor, because I couldn't have done this without him. And about 2 or 3 months later, I said, you know, you promised you were going to write My Debt to Frank O'Connor. And she looked at me grimly and she said, and if you really want to torture me, you hold me to that promise. So it was very painful for her. She was, and when he was alive, whenever they were in the room together, they'd be holding hands. She always wanted him to sit next to her. I once asked him, saw him at an art class that I was taking. And I got in a conversation with him. This would be in the early 70s. And he said, I know it's childish, but I just want to be with her all the time. I just feel bad being away from her now. This is a 3-hour art class. So that's how he felt. And I said, I don't think it's childish. So they were both very much in love, and I was at their 50th wedding anniversary. So yeah, and she was happy when I didn't know her when she finished Atlas Shrugged, but the story is told by those who were there that she said it's worth it, and it was a real struggle for her. She spent 12 years writing that, 2 years writing Galt's speech, which she said was the hardest thing she'd ever done, and she thinks it increased her IQ. So she had, she had some downs. I heard her once say, "I don't want to live." That was when she saw her, after Frank had died, she saw an actor that she idolized be in a movie where he was made a fool of. But that was a momentary ejaculation. There was during a period where she was pretty depressed. But
and again, just for some context for our audience, the reason we're discussing this is because part of the play is the idea that Frank is deeply unhappy and that Ayn Rand wasn't really maybe in love with him. So maybe when she met him, because he was tall and heroic, but after that it went down. But actually, now that you mentioned that, I remember that beautiful line in one of the Donahue interviews, after Frank O'Connor had died, when she says something like, I don't believe in afterlife, but if I believed in afterlife, something like I would go there just to make sure
I would kill myself and to make sure that he got a good hearing before St. Peter.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, and
I happen to see Leonard Peikoff has the editions of her novels that came out that she owned, her own editions. And the first one said, "To Frank O'Connor, my first temple to you." And the second one said, "To Frank O'Connor, my second temple to you." And I assume the others said it as well. And I have a picture I have a Xerox of a picture from the 30s or 40s where she inscribed it to Frank, and a picture of herself. And she said, it's got a nice twist, which I can't remember, but it was, "I love you more than words can say." And then it turned it around in a way that I can't bring to mind right now. "I'm saying more than that," or something. I don't know. It was some play on that. But you could say, she called him by her pet name, and she always patted the couch, "Come here and sit by me." And he was very affectionate, but he also had a certain independence. And she wrote to Nora that he's my rock of Gibraltar, and he's more solid than I am. I turn to him for support. He was also more anti-religious because they had tried to raise him Catholic. And probably your readers know the stories about how, for instance, when he was 6 years old, the school teacher called up his parents and said, "Frank is not attending school." It's a Catholic parochial school. Frank is not attending school. What's going on? He had been taken to school, left that school, and walked on his own idea, on his own initiative, to public school and enrolled himself in public school. And he was attending public school at the age of 6 because he despised Catholicism. There are other stories like that, but he was a very strong, solid person. And yet he was, one thing that the drama does pick up on is he was playful. And there's an attempt in the drama to ascribe some humorous lines to him that he never said, but to make it up. But he had a lot of witticisms that he would throw in, and he was very friendly and warm. And I'm always reminded of what one random student of Objectivism, a girl, said when she saw in the early 60s Frank O'Connor sitting in the audience of a lecture. And she said, "When I saw him, I knew he was one," meaning one of the heroes of the kind that she writes about. He was, Here's another frank line, but people know this if they've read her biographies, even as bad as they are. Someone said, "You look like Gary Cooper." And he said, "No, Gary Cooper looks like me." And that's the, I mean, it wasn't like reaching. It had an element of truth in the way he approached things. But I didn't answer one of your parts of your question. I forgot.
No, don't. No, I think you did. It was whether they were in love, and I think all this story actually shows that they were. Now, another premise in the drama is this idea that emotions and reasons are incompatible. So the idea is, what was the problem in the dynamic of the relationship, that Ayn Rand would only go by reason? And they put in her mouth this following line. She says, if you think straight, there will be no conflicts. Now, we have a philosopher with us, so I would want your commentary on it. But just one point here.
I couldn't make out that line. What was it?
So the line is, if you think straight, there will be no conflict. First of all, the person who put this as characteristic of Rand probably hasn't read Atlas Shrugged, where, I don't want to make a spoiler, but there is this scene where Dagny's in the new small building, and there's this figure going up and down outside and says, shall I go in or shall I not go in? Or in part 3, there is this huge inherent struggle. There are these wannabe lovers in 2 rooms, but they know that they're not ready for each other. But the internal struggle and the outpouring of emotions within them is so huge. So first of all,
what about Reardon? The whole character of Reardon is a guy in the midst of a terrible struggle.
Yeah. So what is the situation then with people who are rational and conflicts arising? Because again, according to the narrative of the drama, it can't happen.
What is true is that there is no irresolvable conflict. And all of her heroes resolve their conflicts in the end. But some conflicts, if they reach a philosophical level, can take years to resolve. Think of Dominique in The Fountainhead. That novel takes place over, I think, 12-year span. And it takes just about that long for Dominique to change her metaphysics from what Ayn Rand called the malevolent universe premise to the benevolent universe premise. The point is, there are no contradictions in reality. That doesn't mean there'll be no contradictions in your subconscious. And it may take a long time to figure out which side is right. But, my wife specializes in this. And it's possible to get conflicts either resolved or put aside so it doesn't stop you, internal conflicts. Very quickly. You can do. They may come back. They probably will if you haven't permanently fixed them. But they're not crippling. Most of them can be cleared up right away. I'm late, but I want to have this sandwich. I want to eat. I'm hungry, but I want to be on time for that appointment. What shall I do? Okay, the appointment's more important, people are depending on, I'll eat later. Bang, conflict's resolved. There's also a strategy that my wife teaches involving what's called decision cards, which is helpful for personal conflicts. But no, philosophically, that's like a corruption of Hugh Axon's statement there that Francisco utters, there are no contradictions in reality. Check your premises. So that doesn't mean that checking your premises every time instantly tells you the answer. But so it's not true that if you're in focus, as she would put it, that you never have a back, maybe I should use, I don't know, I'm pulled in this way and I'm pulled in that way. That's not true. And she would never have said that.
So let's get now to the core of what is supposedly the attack on Ayn Rand, which was the whole story with the drama with Nathaniel Branden. And then the idea is that, look, you tell us that you are rational and see what you did there. So I assume there that the premise is that either that when you're a rational person, you never make mistakes.
Yeah.
But let's take it one step further. Is this a story about Ayn Rand's lives or about Ayn Rand's ideas? Because supposedly it's about her ideas, but all we see is random highlights from her life. So how would you deal with this? Someone telling you, hey, you know, Ayn Rand was supposedly reasonable, but she made a mistake and she regretted it. So what's the lesson to take away from that?
I don't want to answer in a way that suggests I think, well, actually, she wasn't totally rational, but she was still a good person. But take Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton believed in the restorative properties of tar water, and he wrote as much on crazy stuff as he did on physics. So what's the point? And notice how selective it is. It's an ad hominem. You know, the ideas are false because the person is called circumstantial ad hominem. The person who put them forward didn't live by them himself. So the ideas are invalid. No, it's just, if that is true, it's just something wrong with the person themselves, which is of historical interest, but not philosophic interest. Immanuel Kant was afraid of moonlight and had to have his windows boarded up. And then he got afraid not to have moonlight, and he had to have the windows open up and have his bed moved to, you know, right under the window. Marx had illegitimate children that he abandoned to starvation, practically, maybe literally. I mean, all these major figures in the history of philosophy, I shouldn't say all, but so many, the vast majority, were not upstanding people. Ayn Rand was. And, but it wouldn't change the ideas if she hadn't been. So I'd like to get into, because we're kind of moving along here, why the attack? What's going on? Why aren't they sympathetic? Why aren't they doing a dialogue that puts Ayn Rand in a good light? Why aren't they spotlighting all of her achievements, which those of us on this call probably know many of, most of? And I think it's disturbingly simple. They're second-handers, social metaphysicians. They live for the approval of other people. They are terrified of being on their own, making their own judgments. And that comes out as a hatred for any philosophy that teaches independence and self-reliance and firsthand values, individualism, of which Ayn Rand is non-pareil, if I'm pronouncing that, no parallel, unparalleled advocate of you have to live your own life by your own mind. You can't swim with the herd. You know, that's mixing metaphor. Run with the herd. You have to make your own thinking correspond to reality as best you can and not accept anything on faith. And the reason I didn't accept this just because a priori, there can't be any good reason, so what could it be? But I was thinking about the attack on egoism that's in the introduction, and I assume is carried out in the drama. And, you know, they say, look out for yourself and to hell with everyone else. It's a philosophy of cruelty.
Cruelty, yeah.
Right? That was used. And I had to ask, well, what makes them say that? Because when I first read Atlas Shrugged, I said, she's defending selfishness. Wow, that's fantastic. I've never met, you know, I don't accept self-sacrifice, and I think it's okay to be selfish, but she thinks it's the right thing. I mean, what courage, what independent thought. But that's not their reaction, right? Their reaction is, this is horrible. Selfishness is horrible. We've got to look after each other. We're not alone in this world. Why do they feel that? I don't say why do they think that. They think that because everyone has told it to them and they haven't really thought it through in any extent. So why do they feel that? Because they're what I call clingers. They are second-handers who cling to the approval of other people, and the thought of being left alone to live on their own is anathema. And it's not just fear. They cannot grasp the perspective. So when I read about, it never occurred to me to say, oh, well, should I run roughshod over others? Should I steal? Now she's giving me the fuel to really say, I'm damn glad I'm selfish. Does that mean I should secretly grab somebody's wallet if I can? That question never occurred to me. I knew what it meant. It meant that you live for your own goals. You're like Howard Rourke. Even this was before I met Rourke, because I read Atlas first. So it never occurred to me to think, well, I guess that means, or does it mean I run roughshod over the rights of it? I had no desire to victimize anyone else. I wanted to be left alone. So they don't feel that way. They feel to be left alone is bad. I'm not going to, prejudge it yet. To be left alone is bad. And I don't know what he's talking, but she's talking about in terms of firsthand values and achievements. All I see is some people don't like me, some people like me, and I try to get with the people who are going to like me, say what they say, because otherwise I'm lost. I don't know what to do. That's the only answer that could explain why they're not saying, yeah, this is very appealing. I wonder how it relates to others, how you treat others. And notice that for the dishonesty of it or the distortion of it, take the worst acceptor of the false dichotomy of self-interest versus self-sacrifice. The one who thinks, you either run roughshod over others or you sacrifice yourself to them. Take the worst exponent of that. Now give him children or her, and he or she loves the child very much. Can you imagine taking the child aside, like Bernie Madoff, okay? Takes the child aside and says, listen, Frank, well, that's not her husband, so you give him a different name. Kevin, I know that society will tell you to be a good little boy and behave and treat others nicely, but I love you so much. I want you to be happy and successful. I don't want you to throw away your life like that because I love you so much. Steal, rob, cheat. Don't tell anyone you're doing this, but this is what I'm advising you. That's the path to happiness. I want to see you steal, rob, and cheat. Nobody would say that to the child because they all kind of sense, no, that's a bad policy. That's not going to get me happiness or permanent success. That stinks. So they know everybody knows in some sense that you don't walk down, you don't get evangelist self-interest by walk down the street with a gun and popping off people as you see them. That you build relationships and you get cooperation, you find someone you love. I mean, so it's too stupid. It has to be motivated. Oh, here's a weapon I can use against the egoist. I can, they are victimizing me and I can give voice to that. How are they victimizing you? Well, they don't approve of me. They don't even notice me sometimes. And that's death inside because I live to be noticed. I live to have a place in their minds. And
I live for others, altruism by definition. This is actually altruism, not what they think benevolence. I live for others. I live so that I live in other people's mind, like Keating.
Now, see, that's one of the themes of the Fountainhead that didn't strike me on the first 5 readings, probably. Altruism and second-handerism are kind of the same thing looked at from an ethical or a psychological perspective. So whether you say live for others or live for others' approval, it comes to the exact same thing. And thinking for yourself and being independent, pursuing your own life doesn't fit into the scheme at all. That's not on, as we would say. So that's the reason that I figure is because they only have that one weapon. Have you ever, I haven't heard, well, philosophers have other weapons, but no one listens to them. Philosophers would try to tell you that any ethics is a violation of logic, but that doesn't stop them from going to church, and from advocating socialism. So no, that doesn't really have much impact. And every other argument comes down to selfishness. So you want to murder, rob, loot, steal, pillage, put yourself first and kick everyone else out. Yeah, my ideal would be if everyone else died, then I'd have the whole world to myself. Imagine how delighted I would be at that. I mean, it's from Mars.
And also, it's Ayn Rand so clearly. So not liking cruelty is, in a way, justice. When good people are suffering, we see her heroes are also suffering. So I remember that scene when Rourke goes to Mallory and Mallory breaks to tears, and Rourke is really, really sad for Mallory. Or the scene where Reardon takes in his arms the wet nurse who is dying, and there's so much compassion there, but as justice, as this is something that you would do for someone who deserves it, or even you'd expect that he deserves it. For example, someone you don't know and they're drowning. So here's a final question then, what I was thinking. So in a way, I feel more optimist after these attacks, because what I see is that there's basically no one on the other side. What we have on the other side is not these giants of the spirit and we have to give our best fight. We still have to give our best fight, but they're almost empty cells. There's this scene in Atlas Shrugged, I don't remember exactly how it goes. We expect giants, and what we saw was some scared creatures ready to run at the first sign of life or something like that.
Well, it's in We the Living.
Or
and
he
says that we saw on the horizon the form of a giant, but when we got up close, it was a big ball of cockroaches scurrying at the sound of a human footstep.
Right.
Yeah,
so should that make us more optimist, or does this mean that the battle of ideas in the intellectual sphere is so empty that it doesn't even matter? So the fact that we have ideas that we actually believe in and we can support, it's almost meaningless. It's not the currency in today's world.
Well, it's meaningful because they put up barriers of force to your achieving your goals. If it weren't for that, and there were just a lot of people, not interfering with you, but not living well, that would be their problem. But it's important because we have to win the political struggle for individual rights. Now, there's an interesting bridge in that, Nikos. There was an article I'm holding it up from the video, article in the op-ed page of the Wall Street Journal today, which gives voice to what I was just talking about here. It's very interesting. COVID-19 vaccines are almost here. Pfizer announced Monday that its vaccine has proved more than 90% effective in clinical trials. But vaccines are useless unless people take them. And it's likely many will refuse. Vaccines are useless unless people take them. Now, what is inside the soul of this guy, who I think is writing in favor of freedom, competitive enterprise? Vaccines are... Now, here's what he doesn't think. The people who don't take them have no effect on the people who do take them. And in fact, the people who do take them provide some degree of safety to the people who don't, because it adds to herd immunity. There's less chances of them being infected because these people who are not getting infected are in between them. So he doesn't think in terms of that. He lives in a world of other people. Oh, people don't like it. People are resistant. People, the race, the folk, the state, whatever, the collective. The collective is not going to go for this unless the collective goes for this. All is lost. Why? Well, there's nothing else besides the collective we. This is I didn't read past that first paragraph because this is unbelievable. Because on a factual level, it's completely wrong. You could write the sentence instead of vaccines are useless unless people take them, as vaccines are useful even to the people who don't take them. That's the truth. But the more basic truth is you take them. You'll be protected. End of story. What see, he can't conceive of individual action. Okay, so I wanted to bring that in to show how the collectivist mindset that underlies that attack on egoism is living in a world where the only thing that matters is people's emotions. It's not even their ideas. It's, well, how do people feel about this? They're not ready. They're not going to take it. Uh-oh, I'm sunk.
So, so at the end of the day, even if, and that's, I think, the difference between a philosophy for life, so to speak, than a philosophy like Marxism-Leninism. That's, if it makes your life better, or it makes one person's at a time life better for that person, this is of crucial importance. Of course, there are situations where you say the world around is so oppressive and so impervious to reason where I cannot be happy. As, for example, you mentioned with the living, that's the story of the book. But that's a very important message about why philosophy is very important, even if, and that it's not mostly about persuading others. It's mostly about living it and experiencing it in your life.
Yeah, so, let me tell you the lesson I learned painfully over my years in the movement, starting at age 17, and I'm now 76. Surprisingly to me, people do believe the bad philosophical ideas they give voice to. People do believe it. Maybe not fully, maybe there's some chance with some people, but I always thought, they said, there are no absolutes. I said, well, is that an absolute? Oh. Or my friend, a very close friend, was introduced to the philosophy by another friend, and she was saying to the other friend, well, this table here, I don't know that it really exists. I mean, it could be an illusion. It could be society's construct. I don't know what she said, but she was expressing skepticism. How can you say existence exists? This table might not be here. And the first friend said, hit your head against it. And her response was, oh. And from that moment on, she was an objectivist. Now, that's what you expect. I went through my life thinking, oh, you just get to the right example or formulation. You get them to read Atlas Shrugged, which is, much more powerful than any formulation. And a lot of walls are going to fall. But it's not that way for two reasons. One is they really believe, and the older they are, the more they're wedded to it, the irrational philosophies that they give voice to. And the other thing is that the educational system has now lobotomatized the American youth. And that's why I'm tickled to be on here, because the English and continental school system has not been as corrupted with John Dewey, because John Dewey was an American. Now, I know
working in education, that I have some doubts on that.
There are years behind us, but you're going that direction, as is inevitable. given the ideas. So, yeah, I'm always thinking, well, once I really explain it, they're going to say, oh, well, that's interesting. How would you handle this objection? Or tell me more about it. Would it apply so and so? And I've had that reaction once or twice in my life. And it's all with people from my generation. Of course, I don't talk to young people, so that's a biased sample. I take that comment back.
Right. So, Harry, thank you so much. And people, again, for finding more about Harry Binswanger and his work, go to hbletter, one word, hbletter.com. It's a Harry Binswanger letter. Make sure you subscribe. And for us to bring more of these fascinating discussions, again, we're just students of objectivism. But by becoming bigger, it's easier for us to have people who can actually understand objectivism way better than we do, philosophers like Harry. And I think this is a value for ourselves, but also for our audience. So how you can do that, how you can help. So you can go to aynrandcenter.co.uk/membership and become a member. Memberships begin as low as £10 per month, and then they can go to the Reardon Metal membership, which is £100 per month. There's so many perks. We run reading groups, discussion groups on particular courses from Ayn Rand campus. And also, for those of you more interested to get a bit deeper in epistemology, again, Harry's book, How We Know. But also, if you want to find more about Harry's relationship with Ayn Rand, there are two things you can do. The number one thing is go and subscribe to HBL, to the Harry Binswanger letter.
And there's a free trial. There's a 2-week free trial also.
There's a free trial. So what you can do in this free trial is in the last 2 months, I think, Harry has been giving the story of his involvement in the objectivist movement, from that lecture theater where you had this in focus moment till later in the inner circle, let's say. But also there's a good chapter in this book called 100 Voices, Oral History of Ayn Rand. I think the last chapter is Harry giving his account of how he knows Ayn Rand. So, Harry, again, thank you so much. Also, many thanks to our audience. This was perhaps our best week. Well done, Razi. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.